Hello, AGS allies and caregivers. You're listening to our new podcast, a caregiver worthy and rare disease podcast brought to you by Aicardi-Goutieres Syndrome Advocacy Association, where we update you with the latest news and conversations around AGS and rare diseases. I'm your new producer and marketing director, Betty Trevino, parent of two beautiful children, including Noah, who was recently diagnosed of AGS. And today, we have Patrick Winters and Devin Cordova joining me. Can you guys please introduce yourselves?
Should we introduce each other? So Patrick Winters is our AGS research director and our resident advocate, and he's a father of three, including the astounding Aurelia, who was diagnosed in 2018. Patrick has been working hard for the last few years helping families understand the science of AGS behind the scenes and has jumped in headfirst in the last year to supercharge our legacy organization, AGSAA, and modernize its tech and profile and the scientific and advocacy world at large.
Thank you very much, Devin. So you just heard from our AGSAA Vice President, Devin Cordova. She's the most important one in the group. She's a dedicated mother and has been deepening the AGSAA's relationship with scientists, clinicians, and AGS families since, in her words, a delayed diagnosis for her daughter, Rafaela, fired her up.
Thank you so much. I love how you introduce each other. Joining this group has made me so happy, and they're so approachable and they're so friendly and they're teaching me so many new things. So I'm so happy to be here today. And before we get started on today's episode, don't forget to join our conversation. Reach out to any of us if you want to speak to us about a topic that you want to see in the podcast. If you have a question, because I know all of us have plenty of questions, and you can do this through any of our social media outlets. So please join in the conversation. Patrick, can you tell us more about what we're going to talk today in today's episode?
Yeah, so at the forefront of what we've been doing lately has been our interaction in trying to get to the table with Eli Lilly. They're the manufacturer of the AGSA's only treatment. So we're going to discuss the history of how that treatment came to be, where it started, and then we're going to relate our understanding, and of course it's important to say our understanding of the current situation. We have an imperfect medicine, but it's an important treatment, and it has yet to reach regulatory approval. So we launched a petition about a month and a half ago. We got 4,000 signatures, and in the month of September, we did a lot of family highlights to try and tell people's stories, both in general about AGS, but then also about this particular treatment. And really, those stories got us back to the table with Eli Lilly, and we're going to be meeting with them soon. So we think it's just the tip of the iceberg. We want to hear more from families, and we want to better understand both their successes and failures, getting a doctor to prescribe the treatment, covering the cost, getting insurance approval, and advocating for their children in this very difficult situation.
No, let me add on, Patrick, as coming in and seeing all the stories, it's definitely very relatable. And I think you and Devon are doing a great job at putting these stories. And so what we want all our listeners and our AGS community to do is tag us and share through social media your words, your pictures and videos, share your testimonials. So once you see a call to action that we're going to have on our channels, please chime in and share with us your story, because Devon and Patrick are going to advocate for all of us families, and they're going to do a wonderful job doing that. So let's go ahead and get started on today's episode.
I'm happy to, Devin. However, you were around a little bit earlier, so correct me if I'm wrong. I'll start just by saying that I came both to AGS and to the situation with baricitinib and JAK inhibition in a very awkward time, and I'll get into a little bit later, but things were already in motion that I knew nothing about. And so over the years, I've learned a lot more. I've gone back and learned more both about the science and about how the clinical trial started. And now we're working much more closely with the team and people engaged in it. We're going to be collaborating with the manufacturer soon. So again, this is me recapping how I understand it occurred, both through conversations that I've had with people and my experience as well. But the if we go back about like 10 years, and it might even be a little bit longer, Yannick Crow is a geneticist in the United Kingdom. He has done a lot of the very like early science work and genetics work with AGS. And so after sort of explaining the disease mechanics, how the inflammatory process in AGS starts and occurs, one of the sort of seminal scientific papers had a list of possible potential future therapies, and JAK inhibition was one of them. And I'll explain in a few minutes a little bit more about what it means, but it's in essence, it doesn't actually solve or heal or cure the disease in any way. It's very like downstream, what they call, right? Like whatever's happening in AGS, it doesn't stop it and it doesn't fix it. What it does is it just helps with all of the symptoms that arise. But so, in this paper, they theorized about it. These were medicines that, existed and were in use for other things, both eventually rheumatoid arthritis, but also, I think, lymphoproliferative disorders like leukemias and cancers, because they suppress the immune system. And the first studies were single patient experiments, like one child was given these medicines, and then somebody published a paper about it to say like what it did or what they saw. So they weren't very well designed studies. It didn't really yield a lot of information or data. But one of our most famous kids, Super Cooper, he was really one of the first ones, and they showed some neurological improvements. And that was kind of anecdotal. There wasn't really like controlled data to demonstrate what was going on. Really, all they could show was skin improvements. A lot of kids with AGS have what they call chilblains, and essentially it's not psoriasis, but are you familiar with psoriasis as an autoimmune condition? The immune system is building up, and you end up getting these sores, and they saw those clearing up in kids with AGS. But again, they couldn't prove that it did anything for the brain. But still, it was all we had, and it was kind of promising in a way. At least it seemed that there was something useful that might come from trying these medicines. There were some things that went well, some things that didn't go well. I know that a couple of kids still continued to develop the disease, even though they started with these medicines really early. It's just important to emphasize that it's not a cure and it's kind of an imperfect therapy. But we had a clinical trial. I might be kind of jumping ahead a little bit because I think we might want to talk about it a little bit more in depth, but I'll say we sort of stumbled into a clinical trial with one of these medicines, baricitinib. And it wasn't a clinical trial that started for AGS, and it wasn't a very well controlled or well structured trial. It was called what they call a compassionate use trial. The doctor at the NIH, Devin, what's the name of the center? It's Children's National, right?
Yes, that's where Dr. Vandiver used to work, was at Children's National. And so they had a myelin disorders program, and they worked very closely with Dr. Rafaela Goldbach-Monsky's group at the NIH.
And I think they had started this compassionate use trial for a different disorder, and or for a couple of different disorders. And it just turned out that one of the patients they found out later had AGS. And I think that was the sort of thing that snowballed into enrolling more children with AGS and it growing. Eventually, Adeline Vandiver went to Philadelphia, started the leukodystrophy. I shouldn't say that she founded the leukodystrophy center. I'm not sure if she did, but their trial with baricitinib in AGS sort of grew there. But again, if you look back and you think about it, it didn't start purposefully for AGS. It was kind of a let's see if we can help anybody sort of trial, so it wasn't really well structured. But then it seemed to be working really well, and it kind of left us. it left us in a really weird state when the medicine was eventually approved by the FDA in the US for a different condition. All of a sudden, the sort of like rules changed, and you have to start a new clinical trial. And so things started strangely, and they even continued strangely. And so I think, Devin, if you want to talk a little bit, it might be an opportunity to discuss a little bit more how that trial like grew in Philadelphia. And if you could tell us a little bit about how it transitioned from this like early compassionate use to a phase 2 trial, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So basically, just to go back a little bit, so there was, so Dr. Rafaela Gobak-Monsky, she's the head of the Translational Autoinflammatory Disease Studies group, and she's a rheumatologist. And so she was actually studying, I believe, baricitinib in type 1 interferonopathies. So AGS is one of them, but as Patrick mentioned, like it was not specifically geared toward that. So, but my understanding was that Dr. Vanderveer actually saw that that there were proven results like with mitigating some of the skin issues, and she had an AGS patient who had really, really, really bad skin issues. So she was actually only looking, I believe, for the first person that was enrolled to be able to alleviate some of those skin issues. And so that's kind of like also a component of this. Just like, again, we are piecing together as much as we know and as much as we can understand from the history, because as advocates, even though we should be in the room and be part of all of these discussions and do all of these things to like help support the trial, that's not how it works with industry. They have a lot of non-disclosure agreements. Dr. Vanderveer and other clinicians and scientists also sign non-disclosure agreements. So we're trying to piece together like a kind of timeline for all of this all of the time to figure out how we can jump in and be supportive. So
can I say, Devin, it's really interesting to me that like we were experiencing this, you know, without any knowledge about what was happening, right? Like at this time that you're talking about, like I stumbled into this disease and I was trying to figure out how to help my daughter, you know, and it's just really interesting and kind of almost enraging a little bit to know like there was all of this stuff going on that couldn't be shared with me, and I couldn't help my child.
Let me add this. Listening to this for the very first time as a newly diagnosed parent, because it's only been 3-4 months, I'm in shock. I'm just at a loss of words. The reason I haven't chimed in is because I don't know what to say. As I'm learning everything, I'm like, well, how lucky am I to finally come in at this stage where obviously I'm facing different struggles that we're going to talk about, that Devin's about to chime in on those. But I'm just amazed by learning everything that had to happen before getting to this point and where the uphill battle continues.
Yeah, it's been challenging, and I think over the last year or so, we've done a fairly decent job of trying to get more information about this treatment out, because it was kind of there, but it was sort of locked away in like these silos or within this clinical trial. But we're in a different place now, and I think that we all recognize that regardless of what that history was and what the clinical trial looked like, we have information, data, and stories that tell us that this helps most, if not all, AGS kids. It's not perfect, but like moving forward, we want to understand like where we were and how we got here. Having gone through that to a certain extent, it was difficult.
I have deep respect for the families that came before us, because being diagnosed with AGS in 2022 is extremely difficult. But every year prior to this year, it's been harder and harder to get a diagnosis, to get the access to treatment. And so basically we're hoping, that in the future we can do everything possible to be able to reduce those timelines. And so that's like actually, what inspired Patrick and I, like individually based on different circumstances, to come into this role like in the advocacy group. And Betty, I know that you are like excited to join us as well, is trying to change like how this all happens, because yes, that was in the past, but we're learning from the past to be able to go forward. And what we've learned is that AGS was not prioritized because we started the trial in this like bizarro way, and because the organization was started in this kind of bizarro way, when we didn't have like treatment options, we're kind of scrambling to try to like get to a place where we're all moving together. I recently said to Dr. Vandiver, like, we need to be in the car with you driving so that we know like where we're going. And that, you know, I was trying to help her to understand that, like, if we're in the car, we can like, you know, help with directions. We can help with all of these different things. Like,
Yes.
we can help figure out the route. We can make sure everybody else is in the car with us and we're representing like our entire global community. But we can only do that with as much information possible. So we took advantage, as we mentioned in our last podcast, that like we were in front of scientists from Lilly. Lilly basically, like, you know, they were interested in AGS like for the trial, but then the data like from the trial that was collected by CHOP and Lilly, and then they put, so the FDA is kind of like the elephant in the room, I guess, figuring out like what happened there. But so baricitinib currently doesn't have an FDA approval despite extensive safety and safety, efficacy, and like data showing how many children, including like my own daughter Rafa, who's being like fussy because I put her iPad on mute and she wanted to chime in on a bunch of things as well. What we need to talk about and make everybody like understand as clearly as we understand it, but we are still like limited from understanding exactly what happened in the room due to like non-disclosure agreements with the drug company and with CHOP. But basically our understanding was in December 2019, AGSAA, I had been speaking to Lilly, the drug company, up to that point, trying to make sure that we could be involved in the process when the baricitinib was going in front of the FDA in February. I think it was like February 12th or around then, 2020. So in December 2019, they basically said, we can't talk to you anymore about this because the FDA is prohibiting us from collaborating because it is part of their rules that an individual organization cannot advocate for a specific medication. So I ended up being like inadvertently locked out of conversations and like opportunities that I was hoping would help the FDA understand like what the AGS experience was. So the meeting happened in February, and my understanding of it was that AGS was one of like 10 or something designations for other disorders that the FDA was putting forth to be approved for, to have baricitinib approved for like on-label designation for those diseases. We had rigorous data that had been collected for years by CHOP for the clinical trials that were being run out of there, in addition to the data from the NIH. But other diseases had varying levels of data that they were presenting. And unfortunately, everything just basically was like, you know, yeah, this is insufficient. You have to go back. Then COVID happened in March 2021. In March 2020. And everything, obviously, we all just kind of went crazy. And then we saw that COVID prompted some researchers to look at baricitinib as a treatment for that. So then understandably that got distracted. And then we just got further and further away from our relationship with Lilly. We called multiple times, like I sent multiple emails, like, you know, we were trying to get connected with the advocacy group, the group that works with patient advocacy. We were trying to get connected with Lilly Cares. We were trying to get more information out of CHOP, and everything was just like, the system was so overwhelmed by like COVID that it just felt like, okay, well, we'll get back to the table eventually. And unfortunately that turned into like years. So and there's so many families like we were when Rafa first was diagnosed, like that were in limbo. And I know so acutely like what that feels like.
I was just going to add about the whole the sort of batch submission to the FDA. So it's what they call a type 1C meeting with the FDA. The C is, you know, the third. A and B are the types of meetings that are much more directly about getting the FDA to approve or not approve a particular medicine. And then the type C is like for everything else. And so it was kind of put in front of the FDA in a sort of like, hey, FDA, do you want to look at any of this data or consider any of these things? And the FDA just, kind of declined. And so it was never really put in front of the FDA in any sort of, in any kind of concerted effort to achieve approval for AGS. That really wasn't how it was presented to them. And so it's understandable that they didn't, that it didn't pass then, or in fact, it wouldn't have passed. They would have the FDA just would have said, yeah, we'll consider it, and then come back with the data for like a more formal meeting, like Devin said, I think what happened is, the pandemic started, and it just threw everything up in the air. One of the things that fired us up, though, to kind of get back into this, was not that baricitinib was approved for COVID-19, which it is. It was approved for alopecia very recently. And one of the statements in one of the press releases kind of emphasized Lilly's dedication to finding treatments and helping people that suffer from the consequences of severe autoimmune conditions. And no offense to anybody that suffers from alopecia, there are lots of things that people struggle with, but we feel like we're so close. And this is so, this situation is just very tragic for us, because we have a lot of people in the United States that are able to get this medicine approved and paid for. And there's a bunch of people in Europe that are able to do it. But outside of those two regions, I don't think people in other parts of the world are able to get access to this. It's not possible. And getting an FDA approval of the Food and Drug Administration in the United States doesn't necessarily solve that for everybody, but it's like the gold standard. And if we can get that stamp, it solves, I think, problems for a lot of other people. They have a regulatory system approval that they can point to. It'll make it much easier for them to advocate for this for their children in those other places. And it'll wash away a lot of the uncertainty, because it's not just cost issues that we struggle with. A lot of times it's the doctors themselves. They have very little information and very little knowledge, and there really isn't anything out there for them to follow. If this medicine were approved for AGS, it would also come with dosing guidelines and safety and monitoring stuff. And we have those protocols in academic papers, but it's not going to doesn't carry the same weight as the sort of like drugs official marketing information, So I was just thinking, like, we ran through the timeline a little bit, but this was my issue, because Devin said that Ari was diagnosed in 2018. I think it was like right on that boundary of the new year, 2018, 2019. And there was a window there of quite a few months where the first trial ended and the next trial started. And my daughter suffered her regression. She was a year old during that window. And, we knew that there was a clinical trial. There was word that things were working well for a lot of kids, but we weren't able to join the trial because there wasn't one yet. And so I went a little crazy, but I did manage to get my daughter's doctor to prescribe the medicine, and we did manage to get insurance to pay for it. And my understanding is that I think we were the first family, at least in the US, to get private insurance to cover the medicine. So from the very beginning, like, this has been my issue. This is the thing. Like, if I see this to completion, I will feel so accomplished. It doesn't end there for me, but like, I want us to solve this issue with Lilly.
Yes.
Because we still see new families coming through and having issues. And it breaks my heart because I dealt with that myself.
We were declined twice. We were declined twice. And hearing that there is, like you said, an imperfect treatment out there. It's no longer on trial. It's there, but we can't have access to it. I was mad, and I didn't know where to start. I was lost, and now hearing everything that both of you went through, different timelines, just different frustrations, and it's still not over. And now seeing other parents, now we're finally approved. Now we're finally, as of 3 days ago, on the right dosage, because we were declined once, then only approved for half of it. And we're like, what's half of it? That's not supposed to be it. What's it going to do? And it was kind of scary. Like, you're just teasing me. Am I ever going to get the full dosage? So now that I'm sitting down, paying attention to the timeline and everything that both of you went through, different states, different scenarios, I'm just thankful we're getting towards the right direction, but we still have so much more to go. And now that I'm learning, Devon, what you had to be doing, emailing, and trying to get a hold of someone, I'm just thankful. Even though I was not diagnosed yet, I'm so thankful you both started putting the fight for my son.
Thank you. Yeah, we strongly believe, like, you know, if AGS, you know, we're constantly like reevaluating what is our manifesto, what are we trying to do. Like, the reality is, like, what's all encompassing is that it should not matter like what your zip code is, or, you know, who your doctor is, like, to be able to have access to like the only treatment. And it also, you know, like Patrick mentioned, we read the press releases um for Lilly for Olumiant, and it was like bragging about how hard they try to get medication in the hands of people who need it, and that you can get Olumiant for $5. Olumiant's the other name for baricitinib, the commercial name. You can get Olumiant for $5 if you have alopecia. Like, that's not okay. And so, you know,
Don't
this
tell me
is
about
something
that.
to
Don't
consider.
tell me that.
Betty, do you know how much a bottle costs?
4,000, 5,000? Or more?
I think, like a bottle is 2,000, and our kids sometimes take like 2 or 3 bottles a month. It's sometimes 4 bottles a month. So you know, we're locked out of the what they call Lilly Cares. It's their like copay assistance type thing, and we can't participate in it. And I'm not entirely sure. This is what we want to learn from them, by the way. So we are in touch with them. We have a meeting scheduled. We want to learn a little bit more about what options exist for how we can sort of work within the system to make this better, because they may not be allowed by the regulatory agencies to provide us with cost assistance in the US because they don't have an official regulatory, approval to market it for our condition. So there's so much for us to learn that we kind of just want to get in the room, talk it through, work together, figure out what our options are. If it requires us to, continue the clinical trials and get in front of the FDA in a year or 6 months or however long it takes, I mean, that's what we're going to do. But every step along the way, we want to try and make this situation better for people because it's been so complicated.
Wow. Well, I am so thankful that you both sat down and are sharing with us the history, what's been going on in the last 2 years. I had no idea how the trial started in the first place. So where we've been since the pandemic, where we are now, what we're fighting with now, because you're constantly in the front lines trying to get those family stories out there and to get us in a place where we can actually be acknowledged as a real treatment. Can we put it like that? As a real treatment, an official real treatment, and to kind of start wrapping things up. What are the next steps, and what can families do to help right now? How can we help you?
Well, there are a few things that we've been thinking through. Patrick and I really want to come prepared. Like, we want receipts, like, when we go into this meeting, and we want to make sure that we're not wasting time, this brief like hour that we have with them, talking about like everything that's happened in the past. We're trying to create materials that like help to encapsulate that. And I think that family experiences are really, really, really powerful. And there are a lot of things that they're presuming about our community, right? Like, well, it's not a cure for like the brain, so like it doesn't really matter. Or like, it's AGS is too severe of a disease, so it doesn't really matter. It all matters. And they also are making a lot of presumptions, which we spoke to the scientists about to try to like counter when we were at the GLIA meeting in Philadelphia. they are concerned, and a lot of families I know from the Facebook support group are also concerned about this, and their doctors often lead them to be more concerned about it than they actually may need to be. That the risks in taking baricitinib like outweigh the benefits of taking them. And yes, there are risks involved with taking any medication. My daughter has been on baricitinib since April of 2017. She was diagnosed in 2016 and she was born in 2015. We had a year-long diagnostic odyssey, and because she didn't have a specific AGS diagnosis because she was misdiagnosed, we were also not able to get into the trial because it was being moved from Washington, D.C. to Children's National, and then it was trying to get set up at CHOP. And so we missed really important time that we can never get back. So I also know what it feels like to be in that situation and have a delay to access. But then we've been lucky to access it since then. So she is now, so now it's 5 years later, and, we have not seen any like adverse responses. Like, she's immunosuppressed, which is something that a lot of families and physicians worry about. And it seems that Lilly was kind of over worrying about that. But we are trying to find out with the patient registry and taking informal surveys and things like that, like, how is baricitinib affecting like families? How is it affecting their quality of life? Are they feeling like they are more susceptible to getting sicker with like colds and viruses, or are they able to manage it like as other children are? Is that immunosuppression like something that is truly a barrier to families wanting to stay on the drug? We just have all of these data points that we also want to reinforce from the perspective of families, because we think that our input is just as important as the clinical data that the doctors are collecting, but we have power over our own data and over the questions that we're asking, which is why we really try to collect it all the time from people so we can share that. That's our superpower, right? That's all we can contribute, is like what our experience is, and try to use that information to like change hearts and minds, like at drug companies, right? So we're going to put out some call to action for families to be able to share their experiences so that we can distill it to like have them understand that they can't presume all of these things and limit our access to this like one treatment just because they're like, they think that, oh, well, it might not be worth it.
Devin, I want to like tell everybody too, just to point out that this is a very pointed and targeted call to action request. In the past, where we encourage people to share stories, we want to get them out there. You could argue that we're shouting into the wind a little bit. We're trying to raise awareness. We're hoping to get noticed, that sort of thing. We're going to be in a meeting, the people that are running the clinical trial, the people that are part of the advocacy organization at Lilly. I will print every single one of these stories and pictures out, and I will hold them up on camera and go through them one by one and read them out to the people that are going to be making the decision about whether or not to invest in our community and invest in finishing this. So this is a very specific audience that we're going to be speaking with, and they are the people that can make this happen. So it's really important that we do our best here, and all efforts are going to be appreciated for sure.
And Patrick and I, we have other jobs too that we're trying to manage. So this is going to be like a lot of like late nights and weekends trying to get this information together. And I'm saying that because like I want you guys to know that it means so much to us to like move this forward. And we need you guys to also send your information so that we have as much as possible.
I'm at a loss of words because I told this to both Patrick and Devon right before the show. I feel like I'm doing a little bit better thanks to them. And every single time I talk to them, I feel like I'm going to cry, but then I'm thankful I have them out of my life. So thank you both very much for what you're doing. And just like I'm volunteering to help out a little bit, if you can volunteer a little bit of your time and a little bit of your story, it will make a huge difference. So we want to thank you. If you guys don't want to add anything and if you guys don't have anything else to add, we want to thank you for listening to us today, for learning a little bit about the history, because I think that's important to see where we came from and where we're going and what we're trying to do. I think that's huge. So from my side of things, thank you so much, Devon and Patrick, for inspiring me and helping me grow a little bit more every day. I love that Devon shared with me, always growing stronger together.
Much, Betty, for joining us and keeping us organized and being a real professional producer. We're excited to have you on as marketing director, and your experience and knowledge is definitely going to help us grow stronger too, as we try to enter this space to provide as much access and information to the advocacy world of AGS as we can.
For real, as an anti-professional, I very much appreciate your professionalism and organization skills, for sure. I think that we are in a very, I've described our organization before as being in a sort of nascent stage. I know that the organization has been around for a while, but I think that we are really at a point now where we are going to accelerate both in our capacity, abilities, and influence, just as a greater awareness and understanding of our disease and the data and information that we have about not only this treatment that we're talking about today, but just about our disorder and disease in general. We really are going to take off in the next couple of years. And I'm super excited to see that Rafa joined our podcast today.
Yes,
so hi, Rafa.
yes.
Have you heard her the whole time being like, hello, right, Rafa? Here we go. Now you can be on camera.
So thank you so much for listening to our show. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thanks for listening.
Bye, Rafa. Bye. Thanks for listening.
Bye, Noah.